Start. Hello and welcome back. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss my second case study of a day in the life of a dementia consultant. So another day in the life, or a series of days actually, for this one. This case study, again, like with Marty's case study, is one of those that I often think back to whenever I get stuck, whenever I think, what am I doing? Then I often think back to Marty's case study and Richard's case study as well, just to, for instance, some inspiration as to, to tell myself I've been here before and I've worked through these sorts of scenarios. So Richard's case study is quite interesting. It's a little bit different to Marty's in that Marty's had a lot of little things that we could implement very quickly and actually physically show people. I could model and show and do different things. Richard's one, there was less, I guess there was one key element that we really had to get right, but it required a lot of work and a lot of collaboration just to address this one or two really key issues that we needed to get sorted with Richard. So like with Marty's referral, this is the referral that we received for Richard. And it said, physical and verbal agitation and aggression, young onset dementia, wrestling residents to the ground, resistive to care, won't sleep, very tall man, residents and staff are scared of him, possible hallucinations, attacked the garden furniture. Best wishes. Again, like with Marty's case, I find myself reading that and go, I don't know what I'm doing. Where on earth do you start with this sort of scenario, really? And again, I tend to think in a lot of pictures, a lot of images come to mind when I read that. And the first thing is wrestling, and this idea that this client is wrestling people to the ground. Obviously we understand he's got younger onset dementia. I think Richard was 62 when I met him. Wrestling people to the ground, resistive to care, and won't sleep. So he wasn't sleeping, apparently, and again, very young, very tall, very strong, very agile. People are quite scared of him as well. So you've got a picture in your head that this is almost like a juggernaut, I guess, somebody that won't sleep and will keep going until they get what they want. I really don't know what he's got against the garden furniture. I really wasn't quite sure about the garden furniture at first when they were telling me about him going out into the courtyard just to the side of the dementia unit. And he'd been picking up the chairs and throwing the chairs and sort of doing quite a lot of things with all the furniture out there. So they thought he was hallucinating, and that had something, what I don't know, but that had something to do with why he was upset with the garden furniture. So just to recap, I go on site and Richard is there. He's very tall, very young, quite advanced in his dementia, I would say. Needed help with getting dressed and needed help with sometimes with his meals. Quite a lot of prompting as well to do things. And when I met him, he was walking up and down this corridor, back and forth, and woe betide you got in his way, because it was almost as if he didn't recognize that there were people in front of him, and that he would just sometimes very slowly just sort of force you to one side so that he could carry on his journey. And what the staff had done, which was great, was actually sort of arranged a pathway that he could walk up and down and there wouldn't be any major issues. Unfortunately, of course, when other residents were around during the corridor, during the day, there'd been multiple times when either they'd got in his way or couldn't get out of his way, or Richard would have, as they said, tackled residents to the ground. And there'd been a couple of incidents of that happening, and it's always really shocking when you see the CCTV footage of things like that as well, because you have an idea, as I say, in your head, and then when you see it live, it really sort of makes you think, wow, this is quite significant. So he'd hadn't been there very long. He'd only been there about 3 weeks, and I think they'd had something like 15 or 16 episodes of physical aggression. Afterwards, they said that Richard would do this thing where he would tackle people to the floor. I think there'd even been a couple of hospital admissions. But until that point, they were trying to give him this leeway, this tunnel that he could walk up and down doing. They were talking about that when he does do these things, that afterwards he seems absolutely fine and quite calm. And so they were really struggling with when they could try and pinpoint any time they could maybe give him any sort of medication or try and work out a way. And they weren't terribly keen on that, but it was getting very, very serious very quickly. And because he's 62, by far he's the youngest person on this dementia unit, by far the strongest, the most agile, the tallest, and it wouldn't take long if he were to push somebody over properly, fierce them, and he'd already done it, as I say, a couple of times, that there would be some serious injuries on the back of that. So yeah, pretty straight, pretty sort of stressful situation to be in. They were doing a remarkable job. When I eventually found out about his sleeping, I was very keen to know, if he sleeps, just how much he sleeps. So we asked the staff if they could do sleep charting, because it's unusual. I needed to know if he's getting any sleep at all, and if he is are they all adding up to a night's sleep? What's happening with that? It turned out that he was sleeping mainly during the day, intervals, naps, things like that. Just sort of, he'd be up most of the night. Certainly would be up most of the night doing this thing, walking up and down these corridors most of the night. In fact, it was nighttime when he went outside and threw the garden furniture about. There was another episode I remember. At some point during the day, he was in the kitchen area, and they'd shut the kitchen area off, and he was in it moving chairs around. So I did see a little bit of that, but to me it looked like he was more stacking chairs or rearranging the furniture rather than, say, attacking it. So yeah, he was sleeping at bits during the day. He was so exhausted. He was just parading up and down, looked so exhausted. And they did try and get him to sleep a little bit, but he wouldn't long for it. He was up again. And that unit was quite noisy as well during the day. There were lots of people talking, and there was lots of action and things happening. So yeah, there was quite a lot going on. And of course, just like with Marty, I can do all these assessments, I can do all the observations, I can sort of, with them, I can time how long it's going to take for him to get from one end of the corridor to the next end of the corridor. And we can look at how to facilitate him rearranging the furniture. But unless I actually get that social history, unless I find out about Richard and what makes him tick, it's going to be really, really hard to take it much further than that. So very fortunately, his wife was there in the afternoon, and I got to sit down with her, who she was going through, a terrible time of it. The children were very young still, and they were really struggling with Dad's diagnosis, and she just didn't know where to turn to anymore. And she knew if she could have just kept him at home for longer, it would have been better. That's what she kept having, this guilt, about taking him into an aged care home when he wasn't aged. All those components to it. And I asked her about, what was the scenario that led to him coming into care, and she said it was that when I understood he actually did attack some garden furniture quite severely, quite significantly in their garden. And she was really worried about him hitting her. And it was Christmas Day. It was actually Christmas Day when he was doing this. And she had to phone the police, and he ended up in a secure unit. And then when time came to discharge him, that's how he came into the care home. So a lot of stress. It was a stressful few months, particularly for Richard, who knows what was going through his mind at these times. But he was still adamant he was going to parade up and down that corridor. So I asked her about, can I ask a little bit about Richard's history? And, apparently Richard, a lot of people, his parents were Italian, although he was born in Australia. His parents were Italian, and they had a vineyard. So he grew up, I think, some part of Australia famous for vineyards, and grew up there as a child. So I was told he always had this real passion for proper, decent food and decent wine, and could be quite a larger than life character at times. But he was very, very well loved. He also supported the Tigers, which, although as I'm coming from England, I've been told that's a very important thing to do. So I take it that's a good sign, apparently. So not terribly au fait on AFL myself, but there we go. I'll accept that. He was also a very good swimmer. He loved swimming. Apparently, as a younger man and into his 20s, he competed in lots of competitions, won quite a lot. There was a couple of medals. I remember there being a couple of old medals and a trophy, I think, in his room that the family had brought in. So he's very fit, very active, loved his sport. And the last piece of information that she was able to tell me, which I guess was like the last piece of the jigsaw, or actually a rather very large piece of the jigsaw falling into place, was that he used to work as a security guard in a sports arena. So when she told me that, I suddenly had this, those light bulb moments that go off when all of a sudden it made complete sense what he was doing. The walking up and down the corridor, this parading up and down the corridor, and because it was so ritualistic, although it could have been a component, we often think it's the dementia, but no, it was actually him totally perceiving the environment that he was in as his workplace. And he would do this all night because he was a night security guard. And his routine at home was to get up at 5 p.m. It was to shower and have something to eat. And then by 7 p.m., he'd be at work. And then he'd work right all the way through to 5 a.m. the next morning, where he'd go home, may or may not shower, she said. Quite likely he'd just get changed and fall fast asleep. But on the whole, that's what would happen. So his routine in a care home where, ideally we'd like you to sleep all night, if that's all right, isn't really going to gel very well. So already we can see that this thing he's doing, this walking up and down, is kind of part of him at work. Sorting the furniture out, rearranging the furniture was probably part of his job as well. His wife said he was always sort of moving things and shifting things around at home. And she probably alluded some of that to when he was also moving and rearranging the garden furniture, although he did break a lot of it. But it was suddenly quite clear now that what we had to do is try and work out a way to facilitate for this to happen, for Richard to, if he feels he's at work, to somehow facilitate this for him, but in a safe way, because the problem was he worked as a security guard for a long time and was very, very able, self-defense, he knew he could handle himself. Whenever he saw a resident in the corridor that was probably getting in his way, or was distressed themselves and calling out, or angry, or doing something, and that happened quite a lot, and Richard would perceive that person as perhaps a troublemaker. And so that person, if they did sort of push him out of the way and retaliate to Richard moving them along to one side, would quite likely cause an altercation. And Richard knew how to handle himself, and Richard most certainly would do just that. So that risk is still there, regardless of this component of it, because as soon as I thought I had this all figured out, and I said to the care staff and the management, and I said, oh, I get it, he's a security guard, and this is great. And they said, well, what does that matter? Because he's still going to push people over. In fact, it's worse. Although I always think if we can understand where the behavior is coming from, we can cope with it better. So I knew I had a lot to do. So between myself, the GP, the manager, and a couple of very, very, very switched on staff members and the family, we had a plan. And this was the plan. So we know that the contributing factors to Richard's presentation, his changed behavior, is his habits and routines and his working life, for the one thing. So his habits and routines are, you know, he wants to work, he wants to guard, patrol, you know, secure the corridors in this dementia unit. He wants to do that, and he wants to move the furniture around as if he was tidying it up or setting it out or clearing it up or whatever. That's what he wants to do. And he wants to do that overnight. When we try to get Richard to fit into the care routine, for example, when we're trying to get him up and shower him in the morning, A, he may not want to get up in the morning at all because he may feel he's just finished his night shift. B, rarely, you know, unless he's actually going to work, would he want to shower. So that was always a tricky thing to manage. So we've got to, I guess, flip it on its head a bit and actually say, well, you know, if Richard were up all night, he might shower rather in the morning, but he might shower before he goes to his shift, which would have been at 5, 6 p.m. in the evening. So we've almost got to flip it round. And noise as well. So noise is obviously a big factor for Richard, or generally people being in the corridor and I guess getting in his way and being distressed and so on. So those are the main contributing factors to this case. So how are we going to solve it? So this was probably one of the biggest projects I ever sort of took on, really. And what I wanted to do was flip it all around. So I wanted to promote his routine. And the way that I kind of sold this to the home was that, you know, if Richard is able to stay up all night and patrol the corridors and do all these things, think of it this way. There are less residents, arguably less residents around at nighttime. Therefore, the risk is immediately reduced. So if Richard is up from, say, 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., the chances of him coming into contact with any of the residents that up until now become a bit distressed and loud or aren't going to be necessarily around at that time. So if we can reverse the day, then maybe we can stand a chance of allowing Richard to do what he wants to do, and also, you know, keeping people safer and so on. So because of that, and that took a lot of selling, but once we got that, we had to get the GP on board, because then we had to turn all the medications around. So I think he was on, say, some Nocte medication at Nocte, and we had to give him Nocte medication in the morning, Marne, and flip them all around. We also had to get the kitchen staff on board with this as well, because the kitchen staff had to sort of prepare meals or put dinners together that we could, you know, then assemble ourselves overnight and put all this there and that there, and so that Richard was still getting 4 meals. I mean, in the end, I think I brokered for pizza. I'm sure it's the only time I've ever brokered for pizza, but I did broker for pizza one night so that Richard and his colleagues, because that's who he thought he was working with, actually could have a pizza, which was apparently went down incredibly well. We were able to source, I think the care home were able to source some additional funding for a staff member through the NDIS. Richard, being 62, was eligible for NDIS funding. So they were able to get an additional staff member, but not during the day, of course, but during the night time. So we had extra staff at night. We had Richard facilitating moving the furniture around if he wanted to, and they got him to do it outside because it was a bit quieter outside. And not that he made a tremendous amount of noise himself, but it was something he'd do, and he wouldn't do it for very long anyway after they enabled him to do it. The trolleys, and he pushed the trolleys around. That was the other thing they liked to do. So that he would love pushing the linen trolleys up and down, and he'd love pushing other things around. And as I say, they used to find ways of him being able to do this without causing too much disturbance to people, which was lovely. his wife as well also bought in some of his uniform, one of his high-vis jackets as well, that we got him to wear overnight. So you couldn't miss him, and it somehow the stars aligned, and we managed to get this up and running, and it ran for quite a few months where things just were able to be facilitated for him to get up at night time, go to bed in the morning. The meds were there. He still did get up during the day at times. I mean, he slept like a log. I mean, once he was asleep, he slept like a log, except to maybe go to the toilet or something. But he was far more accepting of care in the evenings, so that he was always clean in the showers. You know, it is all done. We managed to cover everything, and it worked. It actually worked, as I say, for several months. And I mean, I love this story because it does mean that, you know, I can share it, because it was such a big thing to get around. Like, we've just got to flip the day, but it worked. People were, so if there is anybody out there that, you know, have residents, clients that present with nocturnal disturbances, behaviors, you know, it's always really, really worth asking what they did for a living. Always really asking what they did for a living, because yeah, Richard might have been my first proper security guard, sporting arena security guard, but I'm sure he won't be my last. Yeah. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of Marty and behalf of Richard as well. Thank you for listening and for giving me the opportunity to share a couple of case examples from my work over the last 3 years of working for Dementia Support Australia. And I very much hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers. Bye.